Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is English 102, Section 15020 feedback for the 13th documentary. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's a conversation that each quarter, creates this kind of shift in the culture of the class. On the heels of the Colin Kaepernick assignment, we have this 13th documentary. Both events in history really have a history of being a bit divisive. And so what I find is often at this point in the quarter, students are starting to either shift their opinions and perspectives in one way or another, or they're kind of at that impasse where they're unsure. They're starting to question a lot of things that they knew before they started this class. They're starting to question a lot of that history and asking themselves and questioning some of the information, like, is this real? Is this accurate? And so I see a lot of that going on in discussions, and I appreciate the work that you all are putting into. Sonja, you talked about how the labor industry of the prison system is an $11 billion business, right? And so I think we don't think about what that means because of the way in which we view criminality in America, right? We view criminals as deserving of whatever they receive. The unfortunate thing about that is it dehumanizes criminals, and it kind of places all criminals in the space that we more often think about, like murderers and serial killers and rapists, right? But there are a lot of criminals that aren't on that level of crime or behavior and deserve the opportunity, or let me rephrase, earn the opportunity to have another chance at being a contributing member to society. Unfortunately, because we don't prioritize rehabilitation in this country, or the reintegration of criminals into society, back into society, we tend to have repeat offenders and continued crime issues. Why? Because criminals pay. Criminality is an $11 billion business. In the very same way that it's more profitable for us to find medication than it is to find cures. If you cure a disease, there's no profit in cures. I think a lot of people don't look at the pharmaceutical industry in that way. But if you cure the common cold, well, I mean, the cold medicine industry is like... I'm not going to spew out any numbers, but it's a very profitable industry. Pharmaceutical drugs are a profitable industry, even though they're viewed as legal. Yet we have an opioid epidemic going on in this country that was fueled by pharmaceutical drugs, but no one's going to jail for that, right? No one's being incarcerated for that. No one's asking for the dehumanization and punishment of pharmaceutical companies and their CEOs and their scientists. Nobody's asking for that, right? But we will ask for the dehumanization and the destruction of an individual who was caught with 5 grams of cocaine or crack, right? We want to punish them harshly. They deserve everything that's got coming to them. Bailey mentioned that that something is definitely wrong if we are 5% of the world's population and we have a quarter of the prison population. And Bailey, you are exactly right. Something is very wrong with our justice system, our prison system here. And it's because we don't prioritize rehabilitation, and we create narratives through media about how criminals should be treated and what they shouldn't receive, and what they deserve, right? But I mean, if we approach every mistake that people make in this country in that way, I don't know if anybody would survive. And I think one of the things that hurts me the most is that The argument against criminals is that they made that choice, so they deserve everything they got coming to them. And to some degree, there's truth in that. That is not something I deny. They did make that choice, right? What it does not account for is if they had choices in the beginning, or if they had any good choices to make. The issue with those that come from privilege is that they don't understand what it's like to not have choices or to not have good choices to make. And I think that's a common issue when discussing race in this country, when discussing gender in this country, and when discussing incarceration in this country, is that most of the people that have very strong opinions on it come from positions of privilege. They've never even gotten close to what it feels like to be at the bottom of society. People always highlight the hood or the ghetto as spaces that kind of cultivate crime. But what they don't understand is a ghetto, by definition, is a small, typically enclosed space that's overpopulated and limited of resources. And so you put humans in a position where their main and sole focus is survival, right? And I mention limited resources because it's something that I often ask my students hypothetically in classrooms. I said, what if something happened in our classroom where we were trapped in this room and we didn't know how long it was going to take for us to get out, right? That we were locked in this room, trapped, no one knew we were here, we didn't have any contact with the outside world, but what we did have was one loaf of bread and a gallon of water, right? And I always ask my students, how long do you think it would take before we started fighting over that water, or fighting over who controlled it, or how it was going to be rationed, or if it was going to be rationed? How long do you think it would take a group of well-to-do, educated individuals in a classroom to fight over those resources, right? And another issue about the way we view criminality in this country is that we don't take into account the history of the person that's committing the crime, right? The residual effects of history. One of you mentioned that it's only been 60 years since African Americans attained equal rights in America, right? So you think about that, means that there's people that are still alive, that were alive during that time period and are still alive now, that didn't have rights for a portion of their lifespan, right? And so you take into account that history. And so if they didn't have equal rights, then that means that they didn't have equal opportunities to attain wealth, to attain employment, to attain education, right? So then what happens to their children, right? What happens to their grandchildren? What about the generations that came before them? What did they have to resort to for survival? None of that is taken into account. Why? Because no one cares about criminals. Let me rephrase that. That's a bit hyperbolic. Few people genuinely care about criminals and how criminals are treated. My experience with juvenile delinquents, my experience with those that work in prisons and in law enforcement, I've understood firsthand the living conditions and the experiences of those that are not only in prison, but the pathways to prison. And it's no secret that a lot of it is because of lack of resources and a lack of education, right? A lack of a quality education, right? But what does our government do in response? They don't fund education properly, right? We don't value the things that would help better our society, because a more educated society becomes a dangerous society to politics, right? One of the students in my other class asked the question, why isn't this something that presidents discuss and address? Well, because it's not a priority, right? They may discuss it as a point of interest for one of the groups that they're trying to get to vote for them, but it's thrown out the window once they get elected. It's not a point of interest that they truly care about. Naomi was talking about how little she knew, and it made me think about how little the world knows, how little Americans know. you know, our perspectives and our understanding of the world around us is usually formed first by our families or our home life, then by a mix of our K through 12 education and our experiences in life, right? More recently, our views on the world are starting to be shaped by social media and maybe media at large. And I challenge all of you to go beyond that and educate yourselves on the history of the world and the world around you. Because if you take and only learn from your family, the schools you went to, right, media, social media, then you are to some degree accepting that you want to be told what to think and what to believe, rather than seeking information and deciding what you believe based on the information that you have attained, not by third parties, but by yourself. And I challenge you to do that. Don't take what I say as truth or as partial truth or as anything, right? Seek this information. Go beyond this information. I encourage you to challenge each other and challenge yourself. Because what I find most often is that the biggest oppressors of this world don't have guns or bombs. They have pens and they write legislation and policy. Right? Our focus with police brutality is on police officers, but in reality, our focus should be on the politicians, because police officers are just foot soldiers for policy and law. Right? In the hierarchy of power of law enforcement, they are at the bottom tier. They are frontline foot soldiers. They are carrying out orders that are sent down the line of power. And I don't want us to get too far away from that reality. I think a lot of the focus on police brutality is so focused on actual police officers, right? Rather than the system that not only gives them power, but trains them how to use that power. And we need more resources. You know, a lot of people are looking to defund the police, but I think we just need to fund our departments differently. I think police officers need more training. You know, the thing that bothers me the most about, and I'll digress from this in a moment, but the thing that bothers me the most about the training that police officers receive is it's often not long enough. If you think about what's at stake and all of the variety of calls that they handle, their life being on the line, and that they get less training than you all will get for getting an AA, I think that's a disservice to them. And it's a disservice to the communities that they'll serve. But it's also a part of the policy, right? And it's unfortunate. Rowan, you know, I really, you know, I thought your comment was a bit radical, but I appreciated it. You know, the war, you said that the war on drugs was an act of terrorism. And I think there's a lot of validity in that statement. Because I think like you said, if this was happening in another country and we're viewing this as a third party, or if this was happening to lower class or middle class white America, I think our views on police brutality, on the war on drugs, would be rather different. I mean, just think about the wording with drug use in America, right? The opioid epidemic is being framed as an illness, right? The documentaries, the TV shows that are depicting the opioid epidemic are viewing it as an illness, but the crack, cocaine, and heroin epidemics were viewed as a war on drugs, but it was a war on Americans. So, Rowan, despite the radical nature of your statement, I see the validity, and it has a lot of validity in it, and I appreciate you willing to share that with us. And Callie, preach, okay? You know, you talked about people fighting for freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and I you know, I was taken aback by your perspective, right? right? Fighting for freedom of speech, fighting for freedom of assembly and freedom of religion, and understanding that, you know, all groups of people, regardless of color, are dangerous, right? They all have their dangerous people. They all have their criminals. We all have our drug addicts. We all have our dangerous people, but we are all worthy of equality. And I thought that was so profound, Callie, because we are. We all are worthy of equality and humanity, right? I understand that we often go to the extremes of rapists, murderers, serial killers, right? And we view them, that's how we view criminals as a whole. But the reality is that is a small portion of our criminal behavior in America. There are a lot of criminals that aren't harming people directly in that way, raping, murdering, killing, right? They're not doing that. But we kind of group them all into that space. And then we're like, well, they don't need humanity. They've taken a life. They don't deserve a life. And you're free to have that perspective. But I think if prison is really supposed to be about rehabilitation and paying your dues and serving your time, that those that serve their time and want to be contributing members of society should have that opportunity. But we don't really give them that opportunity, do we? One of the biggest questions on an employment application is, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And if so, what was it? Right? More often than not, that will eliminate you from getting that job. Ask anyone who has done time is an ex-con how hard it is for them to get a job. That will be a reality that you can see, right? That you can hear about, right? You can let media frame that perspective for you that, the work that they're getting in these prisons, they can go out and get jobs, and it's about building work ethic and all that bullshit, okay? Because there are prisoners who risk their lives in California fighting fires as trained firefighters, right? Risking their lives for their community, trying to not only serve their time, but also be contributing members of society. And when they get out, they have no opportunity to be a firefighter. So what's the work experience for? Right? So you're telling me that you have groups of people in prison that are trying to rehabilitate themselves in a position and space that doesn't care about her rehabilitation. And when they do all of that work and serve all of their time for whatever their crimes were, when they get out, they have no opportunity to be the person that you really want them to be, that society wants them to be, a contributing and caring member. That makes no sense to me. But if it makes sense to you, I encourage you to share that, because I'd like to hear that perspective of how that makes sense, right? The idea that criminals should be stripped of all of their humanity just because they committed a crime seems a bit egregious to me. It seems a bit dramatic, hyperbolic even. And I'm excluding the extremist crimes, the murderers, the serial killers, the rapists. I'm excluding those. I think their rehabilitation should be quite different, and I don't know if they should be allowed. I think that's a discussion we can have as a group, but at a different time. But man, the directions of this conversation and the profoundness of these comments and these posts, I'm really taken aback. So thank you for your work. I know this video is a little longer than normal, but I appreciate all of you that are sticking with the videos. It's a great opportunity for us to kind of connect in this space where we don't get to connect in a classroom. And for those of you that have the opportunity to take me in class, I can't wait to meet you. Have a great week, and I look forward to next week's conversation.